Well, I've long been interested in the Midwest and grew up in the Midwest and had a sense that that popular perceptions of the Midwest, as I understood them, didn't really seem to accord with how I thought I was experiencing the region. And one of the things I noticed also growing up was that there were a large number of independent small colleges in the region. And I sort of even thought growing up that this was somehow sort of a marker of that region. And I went to one of those small colleges, and as I went on in graduate school, I thought a lot about the Midwest and wondered about those colleges and came back to that again and again. Education in the role of development of regional culture. And so the book that has emerged is really a result of that kind of inquiry. It's about those little colleges founded by usually religious denominations and how those schools were influential in developing a Midwestern regional culture. I argue that these Midwestern colleges were different from colleges founded by New Englanders and Southerners at the same time, and that those Westerners, well, at the time they called themselves Westerners, that they thought about that self-consciously. We have them saying, for example, Eastern seed cannot thrive in Western soil. What we really need is to have institutions that are indigenous, that come out of us and our societal needs and our priorities. And so they built their colleges in this way. There were many of them. There was very loose control by state legislatures of how many colleges were built, and with the great diversity of religious denominations in the region, there were colleges proliferating. And when they built them, one of the things they did is they emphasized manual labor programs, and that was a national phenomenon, but it dropped out quickly in the South, where people weren't so sure about the dignity of labor, and in New England, where it became immediately clear that the pecuniary advantages of manual labor were nil. And in the Midwest, even though they understood that it didn't make money to have a working farm associated with the college, they still were very dedicated to these programs. And so there was something about that Midwestern mindset that made them want those manual labor programs and want to integrate education that cultivated the mental and the physical at the same time. There was also the origins of collegiate coeducation in the Midwest. And so Oberlin in the 1830s is the first school in the world, the first college in the world to school women and men together. And that spread throughout the region, so that by 1860 there were close to 24 schools in the West that were coeducational. And there were no schools that were coeducational, no colleges that were educational in New England. There were no colleges that were coeducational in the South. And so here was something that began in the Midwest and that became ultimately the norm in American higher education and internationally in higher education. And there was also a feeling in the Midwest of cooperation among students and professors, so that as opposed to other regions where during the antebellum period we see riots in New England and in the South, in the West, no riots at these schools. When students had difficulties with professors and administrators, they petitioned, they boycotted, they found nonviolent ways to resolve their grievances. And so this also seemed to come up out of a certain Midwestern style that was different from, say, the planters' sons, who knew that the professors ultimately were working for their own fathers who were on the boards of trustees, or in New England, where students clearly understood that they had bigger and better things to do after they left. And ultimately, that ethos of the Midwest, egalitarian, not afraid to get their hands dirty, it resulted in astonishingly large production of scientists. There was a study, little known, done by Knapp and Goodrich in the 1950s that surveyed the baccalaureate origins of 17,000 American scientists. And what they found was that the schools that were the most productive of these graduates who went on to become scientists were these small colleges in the Midwest. Of the top 50 schools in the United States, over half of them were clustered in these Midwest states. And many of these schools, some of them were prominent schools, Oberlin, for example, Kalamazoo College in Michigan, but others were little-known schools, Bluffton College or Muskingum College or Marietta College. And so those authors asked, what is this? And I argue that in some ways this too was a result of that Midwestern ethos, that these origins in the antebellum period lent themselves to scientific inquiry, the mixing of mental intellect with also hands-on experimentation. And out of this comes a notable graduate. I start the book by talking about Robert Noyce. He graduated from Grinnell College in Iowa and went on to invent the microchip. He also founded the Intel Corporation, and this was really the basis of Silicon Valley. And I think that Silicon Valley culture, non-hierarchical, cooperative, highly experimental, so much a landscape of our modern world, has these very strong linkages back to that particular place, the Midwest of the antebellum period. I think the approach that I took in this book is certainly applicable to other areas, because the way I look at it, the book is about how there is a dialectic between the place that people were located and who they thought that they were, and then how they interacted so that they built institutions in that place that embodied their self-conception, and then how also those places, the colleges that I study, produced the graduates who went out and amplified that self-conception, amplified that regional culture. And so that mixture of who people imagined themselves to be and how they built the world around them to reflect that, and how that played back and forth, is something that I think is transferable to a number of locales or situations.